I have also been getting lots of positive feedback. People are very much enjoying things. And I work with an adoptee who told me that she really likes our podcast. And it was on a day when I was thinking very critically of myself because I'm learning,
Yes.
very much learning. And like, I was like, yeah, I was thinking the other day because I think very much that a lot of times you sort of run circles around me in these conversations because you've been having this conversation, I think, for so much longer than I have in a very informed way and in this way.
Right.
I've been pretty blank on social media for a long time. And so, like, this is brand new for me. And I mentioned that. And she's like, it's okay. You're learning. And I was like, I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
I value your opinion there. And, like, yeah. So
cool.
I'm also hearing good things.
And I think you're doing a good job. For what it's worth.
Thanks, sis. I appreciate that. Hey, y'all. She's Hannah.
He's Greg.
She's adopted.
He's not.
She's black.
He's not.
And this is the Fake Siblings Podcast. Growing up as adoptive siblings presented unique challenges.
That's not your real brother.
How long have you been dating? The realness of our siblingship was often called into question, and we want to talk about it.
Because despite it all, we've always been super close. And ain't nothing fake about that.
I think one of the things that is amazing about this, here I go again with the word amazing, is that I get to look back and listen and hear the things that I say and kind of grow from that. I don't know if you remember during the football season, all these throwing the red challenge flag commercials.
Yeah.
That's like what I think about. Like, this is that. This provides, and it allows me to provide critical feedback on myself too, which I think is powerful.
Yeah. You don't normally get to hear your thoughts.
Totally.
I mean, I guess it sounds kind of crazy. I guess you don't hear your thoughts coming out of your head.
Right, or like you say things and you're like, oh, that came out differently than I maybe intended it to.
Or just being able to see it from a different vantage point of like, oh, that might have had a different impact than I like expected it or wanted it to.
100%.
Yeah. So.
I feel like that's a powerful way to lead into this conversation. Our conversation today is on racial colorblindness. Which refers to the belief that a person, race, or ethnicity does not and should not influence their legal or social treatment in society.
Yeah, so it's actually a really popular topic that comes up a lot in adoptee circles because it's common that adoptees are raised in colorblind families.
Do you feel like our family was colorblind?
Not entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I remember saying that to mom and dad, mentioning it to mom once. So like, you kind of, I think I mentioned like lightly, like that they had raised me kind of colorblind, and mom took that, like she kind of took offense to that, and she explained her rationale as to why. And then I was like, actually, you're right. Like it wasn't an entirely colorblind approach for mom and dad. They acknowledged Tyler and my racial difference. Like that wasn't a taboo. I was very like clear about the fact that I was black. I had toys and books that I had representation. And I think that if they had raised me like an entirely colorblind home, there would be no like priority in those things.
Right.
Nor any need to talk about race at all. Also, I remember like when I suspected that the grocery store that was my first job was like maybe racially biased, mom called them and like was a Karen for good and told them about themselves. And they hired me because of that. So
I remember that, and I think it's crazy that, I don't know, it all feels wild that it like transpired that way, and then you took the job after like all of this had like gone down.
It's true.
You know what I mean?
didn't even think different about it.
Right.
And so
I want a job.
Yeah. Here's a job.
I mean, I think it shows belief in growth, right?
Yeah.
Mom says a thing, calls them out on it, and they're like, oh,
We didn't think about
that wasn't the intent.
Right. But also, like, I understand how, I think it was like we realized the optics of this is not great. So.
Right.
Anyway, but I think a colorblind person wouldn't make that argument or believe me if I were to bring that to them. They'd probably say, you didn't get the job because you weren't qualified. Somebody else better got the job. Because, like, that's the whole merit-based idea, right?
I think that that's interesting. I think that maybe that's a good point in talking about like a merit-based society, which is where colorblindness relies on a merit-based society.
Yeah.
And so some of the beliefs of colorblindness I think are important to get into.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of them is skin color is superficial and irrelevant to the quality of a person's character, ability, or worthiness. Mm-hmm. Number 2, in a merit-based society, so a society based on like good deeds or like the
everyone is evaluated based off of their goodness,
right? Their positivity as it relates to the society. Mm-hmm. In a merit-based society, skin color is irrelevant to merit judgments and calculation of fairness. Number 3, as a corollary, in a merit-based society, merit and fairness are flawed if skin color is taken into the calculation. And number 4, ignoring skin color when interacting with people is the best way to avoid racial discrimination. I feel like that's one of the ways that I notice it the most.
Yeah, is that last piece of like, people think if I acknowledge them, I mean, I think, that's actually really a poignant point. Actually, I was talking to Dad on the phone today, and he called me because he had this really great lunch with this guy and was really excited about it. And he told me his name, everything, and he was like, he's a man of color. And in my mind, I was like, Dad, are you saying he's black? Like, I didn't say that out loud because he kind of moved on, and I was like, well, I'm not. But in my mind, I'm like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And he felt the need to call me about it, and he was excited about it, and he was hoping that we could like connect professionally, which is all great and wonderful. And I love my dad, and I love that he thinks about us and calls us when he thinks about us. And I was like, I think even that like hesitation to identify someone's race is like kind of a symptom of colorblindness, because like I don't want to say he's black because I want to avoid discriminating against him, but it's like you're literally just making an observation. Yeah,
I think too that for our parents' generation, they didn't use those terms because when those terms were used, they were only derogatorily.
Yeah.
And so like when we speak about black folks these days, or people of color,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, people of color is a good term. It's a good catch-all for like for the the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Like it's for all colored people. It's not just for black people. But yeah, language is dynamic and it changes, and yeah, sociolinguistics.
I mean, even me sitting here, I'm like black folks or people of color. I like stutter over it, and it's. Because I think that maybe it's being raised in a white town and not having that language, or being raised with that language. It's something that I, still develop and still want to, know that I'm saying the right thing. So I stutter over my words and it sounds uncomfortable.
Right. But I think it's like people want to, I think it kind of goes back to that idea that like, if I avoid it, then I won't discriminate. Or I won't make a mistake if I just avoid it. Whereas, like, I think there's something to putting yourself out there and making a mistake, because then you can be corrected. But if you never do, then you don't know what mistakes you're making, and you just assume you're just doing it all right. Which brings us perfectly into the video, what we were excited to talk about.
Yeah, so take a moment and listen to this clip.
I'm not raising black children. I'm raising children. And whether you are black or you are white, no matter what race that you are, there are certain things about being a man and being a good man when it comes to character and integrity and safeguarding the helpless and sticking up for those who need it and being a good man of reputation. None of that has to do with skin color. Everything has to do with the character of the man. Probably not an answer that some people would say is important, but that's where the world has gone, where we think that the most important thing about about us as our skin color or our gender or our political affiliation or all these different identity politics or the identities that we put on each other, when really we're just human beings on this earth. And there are certain things about being a good person that transcend skin color and age and sex and religion and all of those different things.
I love that answer.
Big move.
So that clip, if you're unfamiliar, Michael Chandler is a UFC fighter. I believe, if not current, he has been a champion in the past. So a famed person. He is a big name in the UFC world. And he is on a popular podcast, the Shawn Ryan Show, and speaking about his, he is an adoptive parent.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's speaking about how he is raising his 2 black boys. And
You heard what he had to say. But we wanted to really highlight a few of the quotes that stuck out to us as people who have been in a transracial adoptive family, and just our first impressions of what are your thoughts on that?
absolutely. And I think going into this conversation and sort of just us in general, we are in this conversation to assume best intent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we would have made it to episode 4 without Hannah assuming best intent with me. We're all in this to learn together. We want to bring people into this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the goal here. What may sound as criticism and what is criticism is not to push others away from the conversation. It is to open a conversation. And
we're definitely assuming that Michael Chandler. We're assuming that Michael Chandler has a good intent and means well and cares about his children.
Mm-hmm. And I also think this clip is huge right now.
Yep.
And there is lots of feedback on this side of things and this side of things. And I think that it's really important to center a voice like Hannah's in this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Not only, I just think having been a transracial adoptee, this is you, girl.
Yeah, it's true. And that's kind of in the fact we're acknowledging the fact that we are assuming best intent. But we really want to focus today on the impact. So focusing on how impact matters more than intent. You can have the best of intentions. I can have the best of intentions driving my car, but if I run somebody over, that don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because the impact is you ran somebody over, fam.
Precisely.
That's it. And so
dangerous.
Exactly. So we are assuming the best about Mike.
And also we are more concerned with the impact that this has on his kids.
Yep.
And kids in general, black kids of white families or Asian adoptees, all across the board.
Yeah. Adoptees of color who are being raised by colorblind parents.
That.
You got it. So, first quote we want to talk about was the thing that really is caught on fire, which is, I'm not raising black children, I'm raising children. Which,
boom, that is colorblindness to a T.
Literally. And I think what I worry about with that is what is that teaching his adoptive sons about blackness?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's there is an assumption that if you acknowledge color or race, it's a bad thing, which then also can, I think, translate into my color is a bad thing. I see this happen in the church too, but people will say, which was also another big piece of this interview. We did actually listen to a lot more of the interview.
Yeah, not just this clip.
And
I think
there was
that
a lot of spiritual language used when Chandler's describing his approach to parenting, and even this, what informs this viewpoint for him. I say that to say, I see this a lot in church as a believer, that people they see like spiritual maturity in alignment with color blindness. In that, like, if I'm not acknowledging race, I've elevated to this higher sense of self, where it's like all that matters is that we're created in God's image, and so like acknowledging race is wrong.
Because we are all God's children.
Because we're all God's children, and to acknowledge it is to like put that above your faith. There can be like a pressure on people of color who believe to deny their identity because it's like you're making an idol out of your identity and your culture when you should just
be making an idol of the God that you
pretty
worship.
Much. But also, like, really, it's the God of white supremacy, but they don't realize that.
Will you say more?
Yeah.
So, like, the God of white supremacy.
Well, like, I think a lot of times that thing of like you're making an idol out of the culture is there is an implication that there is no culture in white evangelical spaces when the culture is very clearly one of whiteness.
Right.
And it's like, in order for you to show your godliness, you need to assimilate to our whiteness.
To our white male God.
Yes. and it typically means like I said, there's like this pressure to deny your identity. So that means like not dressing a certain way, not talking a certain way, not like all these things that are signals of culture you're supposed to get rid of. But that really get rid of is just look like us.
Right. Which is wild too, because like dressing, like to not dress a certain way means to dress like this. So wear your polo and your blue jeans or your nice Sunday, garb, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's within the context of whiteness.
It's basically like, it again shows that like the ways in which whiteness is the norm in a way that makes it hard for people to see it. So they don't see it as like, oh, we're like having white people church. It's like we're having church the right way.
Where nobody says anything when the preacher says things.
Yes.
We're quiet.
We're quiet and we listen.
Sit with our arms folded.
And we do this, and our women do this, and our men do this.
Yes. And so that brings up another one of his quotes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is, that's where the world has gone, where we think the most important thing about us is our skin color or our gender or our political affiliation or all these different identity politics. And I think that it's really problematic to throw race into all of these other identity politics. I also think when we say, I don't know, I don't think that anybody is saying the most important thing about another is skin color.
Yeah.
But we, as white folks, live within a world and like this like culture where whiteness is the norm.
Yeah.
And if you don't see it, I encourage you to try to take note of it when you walk around on a day-to-day basis. We also, as white folks, have created the label of race dating back to the 1500s, probably before that, but I feel like I'd recall something about like those dates in my mind, where like race did become an issue or like a way to distinguish one person from the next, which eventually led to slavery and all of these other things. And so it's disingenuous of us as white people to now say this culture or your skin color and the culture that has developed around it, which there are infinites in the African diaspora, is invalid, or saying that like now race doesn't matter is easy for us to say within this world that we have created.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it doesn't matter for white folks except for in ways that benefits them. So I just feel like it's easy for you to say it doesn't matter when there's no negative consequences to your race. Another thing I was thinking about is like this thought that I've heard before, which is like white folks think about race like this, which is race is real, like they believe that Black, Asian, Latinx, Native are all different races of people. They believe that that's the truth. But so they believe that race is real, but it doesn't matter. It's like all those things are real things, but they have no impact on how their outcomes come out. When they should be thinking race is not real, it's a social construct that was created to justify the oppression of non-white people. But it does matter. So despite it not being a real thing, despite it being total fabrication of the depraved human imagination, it has real impacts on the real lives of real people.
I think the realist expression of what you just said, I already snapped, but like, just keep doing this. Everything that you're doing. Hannah's over here saying these things, and her hand is visibly shaking as she says it.
Yeah.
Because you feel it in your body.
Yeah. When it comes to like race and racism, white caregivers have the privilege of opting in and out of when they want to care about it or when it impacts them. And oftentimes in that opting in or out, in my workbook, shameless plug, in my workbook, I talk about how white caregivers will often shield themselves and their children from seeing and feeling the impacts of race and racism. But in that shielding, they're really shielding themselves. And the shield that they're using is their adopted children. So basically, like, it's so aggravating and upsetting to me because I just feel like you can say it doesn't matter, but the person that's going to feel the result of that, the impacts of that, the implications of that is the person in your care. And that's where my concern lies, is kids and their experiences, because they didn't ask to be here. They didn't ask to be adopted by you. And it's hard. And colorblindness makes it harder. Yeah.
I think it would be perfect. There was like something that you said in there, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it hit so hard that I think that we should just leave like 5 seconds of silence after it.
Yes, sir. I hope that this episode sparks conversation. I'd love to hear from adoptees of color, from interracial adoptees. Were you raised in a colorblind family with colorblind caregivers, and what was that like for you? We talked a little bit about our family, and I didn't necessarily feel like our family was like completely colorblind, but I think there was elements of colorblindness in our family, especially around, I think, that dad and mom being boomers. I feel like there is a big belief in meritocracy. I think there's still, maybe not so much anymore, but I think when I was a kid was this underlying belief that like it doesn't matter. Like if you work hard.
Yeah, if you work hard, you will get.
Yeah.
You will achieve. Which is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think that like that's so I would say like in a nuanced way, mom and dad, there were elements of colorblindness.
Sure.
And I think that like in a Black household, like Brett talks about how his family raised him to say like, or they raised him with the saying like you have to work twice as hard to get half as much.
Mm.
And so like it that completely rebuts the argument of meritocracy.
That's an interesting point, and I think about like counter arguments to that point, which are like, well, we live in a classist society, which is true, but also like that is not the rebuttal to the fact that Black folks have to work twice as hard to get half as much. Yeah, so I think like, you know, people here that had to work twice as hard to get half as much. And I think that a lot of people probably feel a lot of, in 2024, I feel like there's a lot of people feeling that way. And, there's some ageism that goes into that and lots of things, but I think that doesn't dilute, or I think that only dilutes the point that this has been something that people of color have been battling for a long, long time, and in lots of layered ways within a system that has been constructed to suppress. Yeah, I don't know. Did we want to address this other counterpoint?
We can. Okay, so we thought about what people might say to our criticism of, not even really criticism. I mean, I guess it is criticism of Michael Chandler, but it's also criticism, more so criticism of the belief in colorblindness and just some of his other beliefs that are problematic. We thought that people might be like, well, what are we like? I think sometimes defensiveness will cause people to hear criticism of white caregivers to black children as
negativity, disbelief,
a condemnation of their parenting,
right?
Or like you shouldn't adopt black kids, which is that's a horror. That's an episode. Anyway, now that's an episode. And that kind of shuts down the conversation, and so we kind of want to address those sentiments, the kind of counter arguments, and make space for like maybe some room for some more nuanced.
Yeah, and so so I think right, and so like another counter argument that I've seen is like, these kids hit the jackpot, or like, think about the lives they would be living, and that just like puts a whole lot. There's a lot more meritocracy and like racially charged undertones, coded language in that, because like, okay, we don't know what sorts of lives these kids would lead, and maybe maybe they are put up for adoption for whatever reason. But I think that another point that you had made earlier was that adopting black children as infants, as like young people, builds this economy around adoption, because what is it? The average age of an adopted child is 6, or kid in foster.
The average age of like an adoptable child in foster care. I can't remember the actual number. I can put it on the screen, but it's something like somewhere between like 6 and 10.
Sure.
And so basically, those there's a lot of language around adoption that just is basically virtue signaling. So pointing to like how you're an altruistic, wonderful person, and yet there's this huge demand for infant children through private adoption, and there's this huge number of children in foster care who are available to be adopted who get neglected because people don't want to deal with the potential difficulties that come with adverse childhood experiences and trauma, and that's to say that people believe that adoptees don't have trauma when they're born, or like being removed from your mother is developmental trauma. The notion that babies are clean slates is not a real thing, because you don't know what the birth mother was feeling or was doing, or
while the child was in the womb. You don't
know their medical history.
Yeah. Yep.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
And then there's traumas intergenerational. That'd be nice, but that's how I felt about this whole video. I was like, it's a nice sentiment, but it's just not the way the world works, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%. So I think like some things to take away from this conversation are center the adoptee
Mhm.
in the conversation. This is not a conversation about this man. This is a conversation about the children who are involved.
Mhm.
That said, this is also hopefully an opportunity to call in parents, adoptive parents, transracially adoptive parents,
Yeah.
in a way that helps them to recognize the ways that white folks have historically for a long time,
Yeah.
been and felt like the heroes, the superior folks, the ones who can provide this better life, the saviors, things like that. And so like trying to address that, not saying that like, I don't know, I think that it is wrong to feel that way, but also like if you feel that way, you're not alone. There are a lot of people who
You're in a system that's created and designed to make you feel that way.
Yeah.
It's like this is a hierarchy creates people who are deitized, made into deities, and people who are demonized. And the reality is both those things are harmful. It's just like it's the same way that like patriarchy harms men.
I think that this is like a call into the conversation to be a part of the conversation.
Think more critically about, the ways in which you might be colorblind, or even the aspects of the beliefs that we talked about, like how maybe you see parts of those things in yourself. And have an opportunity to be more critical about that. And that's for all of us. Regardless of our race. Sound just like him now.
And on that note,
it's true, but it's not true. No, what I said was true.
What you said was true,
Yes.
and it can't be said within a vacuum of like race isn't real.
Yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely. The impacts of race aren't real.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because race isn't real.
Race isn't real.
It's the impacts of race that
They're
genetically the
same.
same.
There's no difference. I'm gonna add like a we're the same, but
Or this sound.
thanks for listening to the Fake Siblings podcast. And before you shut this off, we have a few simple requests.
1, subscribe to the pod. B, leave us a glowing review. 3rd, follow us on all the socials at Fake Siblings Pod.
We release new episodes every Wednesday, so until next time.
Thank you for listening.
Bye, y'all. I mean, first try. Okay.